The banker's daughter arrived in Salida, Colorado on a Tuesday afternoon in June of 1876, and she brought with her 3 trunks, a dead father's fortune, and a determination that made even the hardened miners step aside when she walked past. Natalie Wright descended from the stagecoach with dust coating her dark traveling dress, her auburn hair pinned severely beneath a proper Eastern hat that looked absurdly out of place against the rough timber buildings and muddy streets. She was 22 years old and had traveled alone from Philadelphia after burying her father, whose final words had been about this town, this investment, this last desperate attempt to salvage what remained of their family name. The Wright banking company had collapsed in a scandal that left her father's reputation in tatters, but he had whispered to her about the mining investment in Colorado, about the shares he had purchased under a different name, about the small fortune that might still exist if she could only reach it before the creditors discovered its existence. The Rocky Mountains rose like jagged teeth against the western horizon, their peaks still crowned with snow despite the summer warmth. Salida sat in the Arkansas River Valley, a town that had sprung up almost overnight when the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad came through 4 years prior. It was rough and raw and nothing like the civilized streets of Philadelphia, but Natalie had not come here seeking civilization. She had come here to survive. Miss Wright. A young man approached, his face eager and open beneath a bowler hat that marked him as someone trying desperately to appear more sophisticated than his surroundings. "I am Thomas Garrett, the telegraph operator. I received word you would be arriving. Your father's attorney sent instructions regarding your accommodation." Natalie nodded, her green eyes scanning the street with an assessment that would have made a general proud. Salted among the ordinary businesses were no fewer than 6 saloons, their painted signs promising entertainment and forgetting in equal measure. Men moved along the wooden sidewalks with the particular swagger of those who believed themselves beyond the reach of Eastern law. This was a place where people came to disappear, to reinvent themselves, to escape. "The arrangements are satisfactory?" she asked, her voice carrying the crisp consonants of her expensive education. "Yes, madam. There is a room at the hotel, and I have taken the liberty of arranging a meeting with Mr. Henderson at the assay office tomorrow morning. He has been managing your father's investment interests." "I will meet with him this afternoon," Natalie said. "I did not travel 2,000 miles to wait politely." Thomas Garrett blinked, then nodded. "Yes, madam, I will send word immediately." The hotel was called the Arkansas River Lodge, a grandiose name for a 2-story building that creaked ominously in the wind. But the room was clean, and the window overlooked the main street, and Natalie had learned during her journey west that these were luxuries not to be taken for granted. She changed from her traveling clothes into a dress of deep green that had been tailored to suggest both respectability and prosperity, arranged her hair in a softer style that framed her heart-shaped face, and prepared herself for battle. She had learned from her father's mistakes. He had been trusting, had believed in contracts and handshakes and the fundamental honesty of men. She believed in none of these things. She believed in careful observation, in documented proof, and in the principle that people would steal from you the moment you looked away. Mr. Henderson turned out to be a nervous man with ink-stained fingers, and a tendency to avoid direct eye contact. His office smelled of paper and tobacco, and the ledgers stacked on every available surface created a maze of financial documentation that Natalie navigated with the ease of someone raised in a banking household. "Miss Wright, I must say this is highly irregular," Henderson said, mopping his forehead with a handkerchief despite the relative coolness of the office. "Your father always conducted business through correspondence." I was not aware he had a daughter, and certainly the arrangement we discussed did not include Mr. Henderson," Natalie interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "My father is dead. He died 3 weeks ago in Philadelphia. I am his sole heir, and I am here to review the accounts of his investment in the Silver Bell mine. I have brought all necessary legal documentation, which I am happy to provide for your inspection. What I am not happy to do is waste time discussing the irregularity of my existence." Henderson's face flushed red, but he nodded and began pulling ledgers from the stacks with trembling hands. Natalie spent the next 3 hours reviewing every entry, every expenditure, every claim of ore extracted and profits distributed. She had been doing her father's actual bookkeeping since she was 16, after his eyesight began to fail, and his mind began to wander into the optimistic delusions that eventually destroyed him. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The Silver Bell mine existed. The investment existed. But the returns that had been reported to her father bore almost no resemblance to the actual production. Someone had been systematically stealing from the operation, skimming profits and inflating expenses, and Henderson's nervous demeanor suggested he was either complicit or terrified. "Who manages the actual mining operation?" Natalie asked, her finger resting on a particularly suspicious entry for equipment repairs. "That would be Mr. Carlyle," Henderson said. "He owns the majority share and oversees the daily operations. And where might I find Mr. Carlyle?" Henderson's expression suggested she had just asked where she might find the devil himself. "Mr. Carlyle is not a man who welcomes unexpected visits, Miss Wright. Perhaps if I were to arrange a formal meeting, the address, Mr. Henderson." He gave it to her, though his hand shook as he wrote it down. The Silver Bell mine was 6 miles outside of town, up a road that wound into the mountains with an optimism that the actual trail did not support. Natalie hired a buggy and a driver the next morning, ignoring the driver's protests about the unsuitability of the journey for a lady. She had not come this far to be deterred by rough roads and masculine disapproval. The mine itself was a collection of rough buildings clustered around a dark opening in the mountainside, with a stamping mill that filled the air with rhythmic thunder. Men moved around the operation with the purposeful efficiency of ants, pushing ore carts and hauling timber, and disappearing into the darkness of the shaft with the fatalism of those who had long since accepted the possibility of never emerging. "Wait here," Natalie instructed her driver, gathering her skirts and stepping down from the buggy with a determination that made several of the nearby miners stop their work to stare. "You lost, miss," one of them called, not unkindly. "I am looking for Mr. Carlyle," Natalie said. The man's expression shifted immediately, a wariness entering his eyes. "Office is up there," he said, pointing to a larger building set slightly apart from the others. "But he does not see people without an appointment." "He will see me," Natalie said, and walked toward the office before anyone could argue. She had her hand raised to knock when the door swung open, and a man emerged with the sudden explosive energy of someone who had already lost patience with the day. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that spoke of hard physical labor and hands that were scarred and calloused. But what stopped Natalie's breath in her throat was his face, or rather, what he did with it. He kept to the shadow of the doorway, his head turned so that the right side of his face remained hidden, his hat pulled low. What she could see of his features was strong and angular, with a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite and a mouth set in a hard line. His eyes, visible for just a moment before he deliberately shifted his position, were an extraordinary shade of blue, like the sky at the moment before full dark. "We do not need whatever you are selling," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Turn around and go back to town." "I am not selling anything," Natalie said, lifting her chin. "I am Natalie Wright, and I own 20% of this mine. I have come to inspect the operation and review the accounts." The man went absolutely still. For a long moment, he simply stood there, his face still turned away, his entire body radiating a tension that made Natalie acutely aware of how isolated they were, how far from town, how completely she had put herself in the power of strangers. Then he said, "Inside," and stepped back into the office, moving immediately to position himself in the corner where the light from the window would not reach him. Natalie entered, her heart hammering against her ribs, and closed the door behind her. The office was Spartan, furnished with only a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that had seen better days. Maps of the mine covered one wall, their careful notations speaking to a mind that understood both geology and engineering. A lantern sat unlit on the desk, even though the shadows in the corner were deep enough to hide anything. "Your father never mentioned a daughter," the man said. He had moved so that his back was to the wall, his right side completely hidden in darkness. "My father had many secrets," Natalie said. "Some of them died with him. Others I am in the process of uncovering. Are you Mr. Carlyle?" "No." The single word was flat, offering nothing. "Then who are you?" "Ben Fuller. I manage the operation. Carlyle owns the majority share, but he is rarely here." "And where is Mr. Carlyle now?" "Dead," Ben said. "Killed 3 months ago in Denver, shot in a gambling dispute." Natalie's mind raced through the implications. "Who owns his share now?" "His widow, Mrs. Elizabeth Carlyle. She lives in Denver and has given me full authority to manage the mine." "I see." Natalie moved to the desk, looking at the papers scattered across its surface. Production reports, payroll ledgers, assay results. "And Mr. Henderson in town, what is his role?" "He handles the financial administration. Pays the suppliers, manages the bank accounts, distributes the profit shares." Ben's voice was careful, neutral, giving away nothing. "Someone has been stealing," Natalie said bluntly. "The production reports sent to my father do not match the actual output. Either ore is being diverted before it reaches the mill, or the profits are being skimmed before distribution." "I suspect both." The silence that followed was so profound that Natalie could hear the distant thunder of the stamping mill, the shouts of men outside, the wind moving through the pine trees that clung to the mountainside. "Why are you telling me this?" Ben asked finally. "Because either you are the thief, in which case you now know I am aware of the situation and will be taking action, or you are honest, in which case you deserve to know that someone is stealing from an operation you manage." Natalie turned to face him directly, though he remained stubbornly in the shadows. "Which is it, Mr. Fuller?" He moved then, just slightly, enough that a sliver of light fell across his face. Natalie saw the scars, thick and ropey and old, running from his right temple down across his cheek to his jaw. A burn, she realized, and a terrible one. The kind that would have killed a weaker man. "I am not a thief," Ben said, and there was something in his voice that made Natalie believe him. Anger, yes, but also a kind of bitter pride. "I have managed this mine for 2 years. I increased production by 40%. I improved safety enough that we have not lost a man to accident in 18 months. I rebuilt the stamping mill with my own designs. And if someone has been stealing the profits, I will find them and make them regret it." "Then we have a common goal," Natalie said. She did not look away from his face, from the scars that he clearly expected her to find repulsive. "I propose we work together to identify the thief and recover what has been taken." "You should go back east," Ben said. "This is not a place for women like you. Women like me." Natalie felt her temper flare. "You know nothing about me, Mr. Fuller. I know you arrived yesterday in clothes that cost more than most of these men earn in a year. I know you speak like someone who has never had to fight for anything. I know you have no idea what you are walking into." "You are wrong," Natalie said quietly. "I fought for every cent my father did not manage to lose. I fought to keep our house when the creditors came. I fought to bury him with dignity when his reputation was so ruined that former friends crossed the street to avoid me. I fought to get here, to salvage something from the wreckage he left behind. So do not presume to tell me what I am capable of, Mr. Fuller. You do not know me nearly well enough for that." Another silence, and then Ben moved fully into the light. He did not turn his face away. The scars were extensive, pulling the right side of his face into a permanent asymmetry, the skin shiny and tight where it had healed. His right ear was partly missing. But his eyes, those extraordinary blue eyes, held hers with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. "You are not afraid," he said, and it was not a question. "I am terrified," Natalie admitted, "but not of you." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he wore as carefully as his shadowed positions. "Henderson is the thief," he said, "or at least he is part of it. I have suspected for months, but I had no proof and no authority to act. Carlyle would not listen, and after he died, Mrs. Carlyle made it clear she had no interest in the details of the operation as long as the money kept arriving. Then we will get proof," Natalie said, "and we will make him return what he has stolen." Ben shook his head slowly. "You really do not understand. Henderson is not working alone. He has protection. There are people in this town who profit from his schemes, and they will not take kindly to interference." "I did not come here to be kindly received," Natalie said. "I came here to survive, and I will do whatever is necessary to accomplish that." For the first time, Ben smiled. It was a small thing, barely a quirk of his mouth, and the scars pulled it into something not quite symmetrical. But it was real, and it transformed his face from forbidding to something else entirely. "You might actually be dangerous," he said. "I certainly hope so," Natalie replied. They spent the rest of the afternoon going through the mine's records, comparing them to the reports Henderson had been sending to her father and to Mrs. Carlyle. The discrepancies were glaring once you knew to look for them. Ore production was being underreported by nearly 30%. Equipment costs were inflated. Payroll showed workers who did not exist, their wages presumably going straight into Henderson's pockets. "It must have started after Carlyle stopped paying attention," Ben said, running his finger down a column of numbers. "About a year ago, maybe longer. He was spending more time in Denver, gambling and drinking. He stopped reviewing the reports carefully. And after he died, Henderson probably thought he could continue indefinitely. Mrs. Carlyle does not ask questions. She just wants her monthly payment." Ben looked up at Natalie. "Your father's investment was small enough that Henderson likely assumed no one would ever check. 20% would not be worth the trip from Philadelphia." "He did not know my father was desperate," Natalie said, "or that I am more stubborn than sensible. That is becoming apparent." They worked until the light began to fail and Natalie's driver appeared at the door, clearly nervous about the late hour and the dangerous road back to town. Ben walked her to the buggy, still keeping his scarred side turned slightly away from her, though not as deliberately as before. "You should be careful in town," he said. "If Henderson realizes you are investigating, he may take action to protect himself." "What kind of action?" Natalie asked. "The kind that makes problems disappear." Ben's expression was grim. "Men have died for less than what you are threatening." "Then I will be careful," Natalie said. She paused, her hand on the buggy rail, and looked back at him. "How did it happen? The scars?" Most people would have been offended by the directness of the question. Ben just looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes unreadable in the fading light. "Fire," he said finally. "5 years ago, a building collapsed. I pulled 3 people out before the roof came down on me." "That was brave," Natalie said softly. "That was stupid," Ben corrected. "Brave would have been not going in at all. I disagree." Natalie climbed into the buggy, settling her skirts around her. "Bravery is not the absence of fear, Mr. Fuller. It is doing what must be done despite the fear. And these scars are the mark of someone who chose others over himself. There is no shame in that." She could not be certain in the dimming light, but she thought he looked startled, as if no one had ever said anything like that to him before. He stepped back from the buggy, raising one hand in a gesture that might have been farewell or warning, and Natalie's driver urged the horses into motion. The ride back to Salida gave Natalie time to think, to plan, to consider the dangerous game she was about to play. Henderson had to know by now that she had visited the mine. In a town this size, there were no secrets. He would be preparing his defenses, gathering his allies, deciding how to deal with this unexpected threat. She needed allies of her own. The hotel restaurant was doing a brisk business when Natalie returned, filled with miners and railroad workers and the occasional businessman. She took a table in the corner and ordered dinner, watching the room with the careful attention her father had taught her. "Read the room," he used to say. "People will tell you everything you need to know if you just watch and listen." Thomas Garrett, the telegraph operator, sat at a table near the window, eating alone. He looked young and earnest and thoroughly out of place among the rough men surrounding him. Natalie made a decision. "Mr. Garrett," she said, approaching his table, "would you mind if I joined you? I find I have questions about the town, and you seem like someone who would know the answers." He jumped to his feet, nearly knocking over his water glass in his eagerness. "Of course, Miss Wright, I would be honored." Over dinner, Natalie learned that Thomas Garrett was 24 years old, had come to Salida from Ohio 2 years prior, and possessed an almost encyclopedic knowledge of the town's social and business networks. More importantly, he was clearly lonely, clearly eager to impress her, and clearly harbored no particular loyalty to Henderson. "I admit I am confused by some of the business practices here," Natalie said, keeping her tone light and curious. "In Philadelphia, financial records are subject to regular audits. Is that not the custom in Colorado?" Thomas shook his head. "Things are more informal here, Miss Wright. Men shake hands and trust each other's word. Your father's arrangement with Mr. Henderson was quite typical." "I see." "And Mr. Henderson, he has a good reputation." Something flickered in Thomas's expression, gone too quickly for Natalie to read. "Mr. Henderson is well established. He handles financial matters for several of the mines in the area. That must make him quite wealthy." "I suppose it does." Thomas hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "Miss Wright, may I speak frankly?" "Please do." "There are rumors about Mr. Henderson. Nothing proven, you understand, but there are those who believe he is not entirely honest in his dealings. My position at the telegraph office gives me access to certain communications, and I have noticed discrepancies that trouble me." Natalie's heart beat faster. "What kind of discrepancies?" "Messages about ore shipments that do not match the official production reports. Payments to companies that do not seem to exist, that sort of thing." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "I have said nothing because I have no proof, and because Mr. Henderson has powerful friends, the sheriff, for instance, and several of the saloon owners." "I see," Natalie said. "And if someone were attempting to investigate Mr. Henderson, would that be dangerous?" "Very," Thomas said bluntly. "People who threaten the established order in Salida tend to leave town quickly, or they have accidents. I would hate to see anything happen to you, Miss Wright." "I appreciate your concern," Natalie said, "and your honesty. Tell me, Mr. Garrett, if I needed to send a telegram to Denver, could I rely on your discretion?" "Absolutely," Thomas said. "The telegraph office operates under strict confidentiality, even from Mr. Henderson." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Especially from Mr. Henderson." Natalie spent the evening in her room, composing a carefully worded telegram to Mrs. Elizabeth Carlyle in Denver. She explained her discoveries, outlined the evidence of theft, and requested an urgent meeting to discuss the future of the Silver Bell mine. She also sent a telegram to her father's attorney in Philadelphia, asking him to research Henderson's background and any business dealings he might have had outside of Salida. Then she waited. The response from Mrs. Carlyle came 2 days later. She would arrive in Salida within the week and expected a full accounting of the situation. The response from Philadelphia took longer, but when it came, it was illuminating. Henderson had been involved in a mining scandal in Nevada 5 years prior, accused of embezzling funds from an operation in Virginia City. The charges had been dropped due to lack of evidence, but Henderson had left Nevada immediately afterward. Natalie showed the telegram to Ben when she returned to the mine, riding this time on a horse she had purchased from the livery, dressed in a more practical riding outfit that had caused considerable scandal at the hotel. She was past caring what people thought of her clothing choices. Ben read the telegram in silence, his expression growing darker with each line. They were in his office again, though this time Natalie had deliberately taken the chair that left her in shadow and him in the light. He had noticed, she thought, but had said nothing. "Henderson will run," Ben said finally. "The moment he hears that Mrs. Carlyle is coming, he will disappear." "Then we should not let him hear," Natalie said. "Thomas Garrett will keep the telegram confidential. Who else needs to know?" "No one." Ben looked at her across the desk. "You are proposing we set a trap." "I am proposing we gather enough evidence to ensure Henderson cannot escape justice. When Mrs. Carlyle arrives, we present her with proof of the theft and proof of Henderson's involvement. Then we let the law handle the rest." "The sheriff is in Henderson's pocket," Ben reminded her. "Then we will appeal to the federal marshal in Denver. Mining fraud is a serious crime. The government takes a dim view of operations that cheat investors and workers." Ben leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made Natalie's skin warm. "You have thought this through. I have thought of little else. It is dangerous. I know. You could be hurt. I know that too." Natalie met his eyes steadily. "But I will not run away from this, Mr. Fuller. This mine is all I have left. If I lose it, I lose everything. So I will fight, and I will win, or I will go down trying." Ben was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Stop calling me Mr. Fuller. My name is Ben." "Ben," Natalie repeated, and something in the way she said it made the air between them feel charged, electric. "And you should call me Natalie." "Natalie," he said, and the sound of her name in his voice did strange things to her composure. They spent the next few days gathering evidence. Ben showed Natalie the hidden routes where ore was being diverted, the false ledgers where equipment costs were inflated, the ghost workers on the payroll. He introduced her to the miners, men with sun-weathered faces and suspicious eyes who gradually warmed to her when they realized she was genuinely interested in their welfare. She learned their names, asked about their families, and promised them that changes were coming. "They like you," Ben said one evening as they sat in his office reviewing the day's findings. "That is unusual. Miners do not trust easily." "They know I am not here to exploit them," Natalie said. "Unlike Henderson." "No," Ben agreed. "You are not like Henderson at all." There was something in his voice that made Natalie look up from the ledger she had been studying. Ben was watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something complex and guarded and perhaps a little bit yearning. "What?" she asked softly. "I am trying to understand you," Ben said. "You could have sold your father's share to Henderson or Mrs. Carlyle and returned to Philadelphia. You could have hired an attorney to handle the investigation. You could have done a dozen things that did not involve putting yourself in danger. Why did you come here yourself?" Natalie was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Because I am tired of depending on others," she said finally. "My entire life I have been someone's daughter, someone's responsibility, someone's burden. My father made decisions and I lived with the consequences. His attorney advised me, and I was expected to smile and agree. Even the creditors who came to take our house treated me like a child who could not possibly understand the complexities of finance." She looked directly at Ben, letting him see the steel beneath her proper Eastern manners. "I came here because this is mine, not my father's investment, not an attorney's case, mine, and I will not let anyone take it from me. Even if it costs you everything, especially then." Natalie smiled, sharp and fierce. "Because if I lose everything fighting, at least I will know I tried. At least I will know I was brave enough to stand up for myself." Ben reached across the desk, almost without seeming to think about it, and his scarred hand covered hers. His palm was rough, calloused from hard work, warm against her skin. "You are the bravest person I have ever met," he said quietly. Natalie turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. "I think you may be prejudiced." "I think I may be," Ben agreed, but he did not let go. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined across the desk, the lamplight throwing shadows on the walls. Then Ben pulled back, almost reluctantly, and the spell was broken. "You should get back to town before dark," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "The road is not safe at night." Natalie wanted to argue, wanted to stay, wanted to ask him why he had pulled away. But she simply nodded and gathered her things, acutely aware of his eyes on her as she left the office. The ride back to Salida gave her too much time to think about Ben Fuller, about his scarred hands and his guarded eyes, and the way he looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. She had not come to Colorado looking for romance. She had barely thought about men at all in the chaotic months since her father's death. But Ben was different. He did not treat her like a fragile thing to be protected. He did not patronize her or dismiss her ideas. He listened to her, challenged her, respected her, and he was attracted to her. She was not so naive that she could not recognize the signs. The way his gaze lingered on her face, the careful distance he maintained, as if afraid of what might happen if he allowed himself to get too close. The tension in his shoulders when she entered a room, but he would not act on it. Natalie realized that with a certainty that made her chest ache. Ben had spent 5 years hiding his face, keeping to shadows, believing himself too damaged to be wanted. He would not allow himself to hope that someone like her could see past the scars to the man beneath. Which meant, Natalie thought with a growing sense of determination, that she would have to make the first move. Mrs. Elizabeth Carlyle arrived in Salida on a Saturday morning, stepping off the train with the bearing of a woman who had learned to navigate the world alone. She was perhaps 40, dressed in expensive morning clothes, with dark hair streaked with silver and eyes that assessed everything and missed nothing. Natalie met her at the train station along with Ben, who had come down from the mine specifically for the meeting. Mrs. Carlyle looked between them with raised eyebrows. "Miss Wright, I presume," she said, offering her hand. "Your telegram was quite alarming." "I apologize for the distress it may have caused," Natalie said, "but the situation required immediate attention. May I introduce Ben Fuller?" He manages the day-to-day operations of the Silver Bell mine. Mrs. Carlyle's gaze fixed on Ben's face, taking in the scars without flinching. Mr. Fuller, my late husband spoke highly of your skills. Mrs. Carlyle, Ben said, removing his hat. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. As do I. Mrs. Carlyle gestured to her luggage. Shall we conduct business somewhere more private than a train platform? They convened in the hotel's small sitting room, which Natalie had reserved for the purpose. Over the next 2 hours, she and Ben presented their evidence: the production discrepancies, the inflated expenses, the ghost workers, the telegram from Philadelphia about Henderson's past. Mrs. Carlyle listened in silence, her expression growing progressively colder. How much has been stolen? She asked when they had finished. Conservatively, $30,000 over the past 18 months, Ben said. Possibly more. It is difficult to determine exactly when the theft began. Mrs. Carlyle's jaw tightened. And you believe Mr. Henderson is responsible? We are certain of it, Natalie said. The question is whether he is working alone or with accomplices. The sheriff is corrupt, Mrs. Carlyle said bluntly. My husband mentioned it in his letters. He believed the entire town government was in someone's pocket, though he never pursued the matter. He had other concerns. Her voice went bitter on the last words. Then we need to involve the federal authorities, Natalie said. A federal marshal, perhaps, or a territorial judge. That will take time, Mrs. Carlyle said. And in the meantime, Henderson will continue stealing, or he will run. She looked between Natalie and Ben. Unless we confront him directly. That could be dangerous, Ben said. If he feels cornered, I am aware of the risks, Mr. Fuller. Mrs. Carlyle's eyes were hard. But I am tired of men thinking they can steal from me because I am a woman and a widow. I want to look Henderson in the eye when I tell him that his thieving days are over. Natalie felt a fierce surge of admiration for this woman who had lost her husband and refused to be victimized. Then, we will confront him together. They sent word to Henderson that Mrs. Carlyle required a meeting to discuss the mine's finances. He arrived at the hotel that afternoon, his face already showing signs of nervousness. He had probably heard that Mrs. Carlyle was in town and guessed that trouble was coming. What he had not expected was to walk into the sitting room and find himself facing 3 people with identical expressions of cold determination. Mrs. Carlyle, Henderson said, his voice tight. What an unexpected pleasure. I was not aware you would be visiting Salida. Clearly, Mrs. Carlyle said. Sit down, Mr. Henderson. We have much to discuss. Henderson sat, his eyes darting between the 3 of them. If this is about the quarterly reports, I was planning to send them next week. This is about theft, Natalie said flatly. Systematic, ongoing theft from the Silver Bell mine. Theft that has cost my father's estate and Mrs. Carlyle approximately $30,000. Henderson's face went white, then red. I do not know what you are implying, Miss Wright, but I assure you we are not implying anything, Ben said. We are stating facts. You have been underreporting ore production, inflating expenses, and creating false payroll entries. We have the evidence. Production records from the mine that do not match the reports you submitted. Invoices from suppliers that show different costs than what you claimed. The names of workers who do not exist. Henderson stood abruptly. This is preposterous. I have managed the financial affairs of this mine for 2 years with complete honesty. If you are going to make accusations, sit down, Mrs. Carlyle said, her voice like ice. Or I will have Mr. Fuller make you sit down. Ben rose to his full height, his scarred face set in an expression that would have intimidated a grizzly bear. Henderson sat. You have a choice, Mrs. Carlyle continued. You can return every cent you have stolen, provide a full accounting of your theft, and leave Colorado immediately. Or we can involve the federal marshal, have you arrested for fraud and embezzlement, and ensure that you spend the next decade in a territorial prison. The decision is yours. You have no proof, Henderson said, but his voice shook. Natalie opened the folder she had been holding and spread the documents across the table. We have enough proof to hang you twice over, Mr. Henderson. Telegrams showing ore shipments you never reported. Bank records showing payments to fictitious companies. A sworn statement from Thomas Garrett regarding suspicious financial transactions. And this. She pulled out the final document with the flourish of a magician revealing her best trick. A telegram from Nevada detailing your previous embezzlement charges. The ones that were dropped due to lack of evidence, but not due to your innocence. Henderson stared at the documents like they were serpents preparing to strike. The color had drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking ill and old. How much time do I have? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. You will provide a full accounting by tomorrow evening, Mrs. Carlyle said. You will transfer all stolen funds to an account I will designate, and you will be on the train heading east by Sunday morning. If you are still in Colorado by Monday, we will go to the authorities with everything we have. Do you understand? Henderson nodded, a jerky motion that suggested a marionette with tangled strings. Then get out, Mrs. Carlyle said. Henderson fled the room like the devil himself was chasing him. The moment the door closed behind him, Natalie felt her legs go weak with relief and residual fear. Ben's hand was suddenly at her elbow, steadying her, his warmth a solid presence beside her. Well, Mrs. Carlyle said, a small smile playing at her lips. That was remarkably satisfying. He will run, Ben said. He will not wait to provide the accounting. He will take whatever money he has and disappear. Let him, Mrs. Carlyle said. As long as he leaves Colorado and never comes back, I am content. We have recovered the mine's reputation, prevented further theft, and sent a clear message to anyone else who might consider stealing from us. She looked at Natalie with approval. You did well, Miss Wright. Your father would be proud. Natalie felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. Thank you. Mrs. Carlyle stood, smoothing her skirts. Now, I believe we should discuss the future management of the Silver Bell mine. Mr. Fuller, would you be willing to take on additional responsibilities? With appropriate compensation, of course. What kind of responsibilities? Ben asked cautiously. Complete operational control, financial oversight, partnership status. Mrs. Carlyle smiled. I have no desire to manage a mine from Denver, and Miss Wright's 20% stake gives her considerable interest in ensuring the operation is handled honestly. I propose we formalize an arrangement where you manage the mine, report to both of us quarterly, and receive a percentage of the profits in addition to your salary. We can work out the exact details with an attorney. Ben looked stunned. Mrs. Carlyle, I am honored, but you have been running that mine for 2 years with nothing but a manager's salary, Mrs. Carlyle interrupted. You increased production, improved safety, and remained honest even when the owner was too drunk to notice and the accountant was actively stealing. That kind of integrity is rare, Mr. Fuller. I would be a fool not to reward it. She is right, Natalie said softly. You deserve this, Ben. He looked at her, his blue eyes searching her face, and Natalie saw the moment he allowed himself to hope. To believe that perhaps he was worth something after all, scars and all. I accept, Ben said. Henderson left town that night, taking the evening train to Denver with whatever money he could grab before fleeing. Thomas Garrett confirmed his departure via telegram the next morning, along with a note that the sheriff was making angry noises about interfering with his friends, but was doing nothing concrete about it. Apparently, even a corrupt lawman knew better than to challenge two wealthy women, and a respected mine manager with federal law on their side. The accounting Henderson had promised never materialized, but Mrs. Carlyle seemed unconcerned. She spent 3 days in Salida, meeting with attorneys to formalize Ben's new partnership agreement, reviewing the mine's operations, and making plans for future expansion. Then she returned to Denver, leaving Natalie and Ben to manage the day-to-day affairs. "I like her," Natalie said on the morning of Mrs. Carlyle's departure, watching the train pull away from the station. "She likes you too," Ben said. He was standing beside her on the platform, his hat in his hands, the morning sun falling full on his scarred face. He had stopped hiding in shadows, at least when it was just the two of them. "She told me I should court you properly before some other man realizes what a prize you are." Natalie's heart skipped a beat. "Did she?" She said. "A man would have to be blind and stupid not to see your worth." Ben turned to face her directly, his expression serious. "I am neither of those things, Natalie, but I am scarred and rough and not the kind of man a woman like you should be interested in. You deserve someone who can give you the life you left behind in Philadelphia. Someone who can take you to fancy parties and buy you beautiful things and not make people stare when you walk into a room together." "Ben," Natalie said, and reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the thick scars that ran down his cheek. "These marks do not define you. They are evidence of your courage, your selflessness, your willingness to sacrifice yourself for others. And I think they are beautiful because they are part of you, and I find everything about you beautiful." Ben closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man starved for affection. "Natalie, you do not know what you are saying." "I know exactly what I am saying," Natalie interrupted. "I am saying that I have spent the past 2 weeks falling in love with you, with your intelligence and your integrity and your kindness. With the way you treat your workers with respect and manage the mine with skill. With the way you look at me like I am something precious. With the way you make me feel strong and capable and brave." She moved closer, her hand still cupping his scarred cheek. "I am saying that I do not want to go back to Philadelphia. I want to stay here in this rough town in the mountains and build a life with you, if you will have me." Ben's eyes opened, and the expression in them made Natalie's breath catch. Wonder and desire and a desperate, fragile hope all mixed together. "If I will have you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Natalie, I have wanted you since the moment you walked into my office and refused to be intimidated. I have dreamed about you every night, imagined what it would be like to hold you, to kiss you, to spend my life making you happy. But I never thought I never believe it," Natalie whispered, and pulled his head down to hers. The kiss was everything she had imagined, and nothing she could have prepared for. Ben's lips were gentle at first, questioning, as if he could not quite believe she was truly willing. But when Natalie pressed closer, her arms wrapping around his neck, he made a low sound of surrender and gathered her against him. His mouth moved over hers with a hunger that spoke of long denial, of nights spent alone in the mountains thinking about something he believed he could never have. Natalie kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring every ounce of her feelings into the connection between them. She did not care that they were standing on a public train platform in broad daylight. She did not care that people were probably staring. All she cared about was Ben, his arms around her, his heart pounding against hers, his breath mingling with her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ben rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said, the words simple and profound. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Good," Natalie said, smiling through the tears that had begun to slide down her cheeks. "Because I love you too, and I have no intention of making this easy on you. Ben laughed. The sound startled out of him, and it transformed his face into something that made Natalie's heart ache with joy. I would expect nothing less. They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Salida, with Mrs. Carlyle traveling from Denver to serve as Natalie's witness, and the miners from the Silver Bell forming an honor guard outside the church. Thomas Garrett played the organ, and the minister's wife provided flowers from her garden. It was nothing like the elaborate society wedding Natalie's mother had probably once envisioned for her, but it was perfect. Ben wore a new suit that Natalie had insisted on purchasing, and he stood tall and proud at the altar, his scars visible for everyone to see. Natalie wore a simple dress of cream silk that she had made herself, with wildflowers in her hair, and when she walked down the aisle, she saw only Ben, his blue eyes bright with tears, his hand extended to take hers. "I, Ben Fuller, take you, Natalie Wright, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said when the moment came, his voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. You have called my scars brave, but you are the bravest person I know, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." Natalie's vows were equally heartfelt, promising partnership and adventure, and a love that would endure through all the challenges the West could throw at them. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ben kissed her with a tenderness that made every person in the church sigh with vicarious happiness. The celebration afterward was held at the hotel, with food and music and dancing that went on well into the night. The miners got drunk and told embarrassing stories about Ben, which he bore with good humor. Mrs. Carlyle gave a toast that brought tears to Natalie's eyes. Thomas Garrett played the fiddle, and several of the townspeople who had initially been skeptical of the Eastern lady now came to wish her well. But the best moment came late in the evening, when Ben pulled Natalie aside into the hotel's small garden, away from the noise and celebration. The stars overhead were brilliant in the clear mountain air, and the scent of pine drifted down from the surrounding peaks. "Happy, Mrs. Fuller?" Ben asked, his arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "Deliriously," Natalie said, leaning back against his chest. "Though I admit I am still adjusting to the name, Mrs. Fuller, it sounds very grown up and respectable." "You are grown up and respectable," Ben said, his breath warm against her ear. "You are also beautiful and intelligent and mine." "Yours," Natalie agreed, turning in his arms to face him. "Just as you are mine. We belong to each other now, Ben. No more hiding in shadows. No more believing you are not worthy of being loved. No more running from creditors or fighting battles alone," Ben countered. "We face everything together from now on." "Together," Natalie repeated and sealed the promise with a kiss. Their wedding night was spent in the hotel's best room, which Mrs. Carlyle had insisted on providing as a gift. Ben carried Natalie over the threshold with a theatrical flourish that made her laugh. And then they were alone, the door closed against the world, nothing between them but desire and love, and the future stretching out bright with possibility. Ben was gentle with her, patient and careful despite the hunger she could feel in every line of his body. He worshipped her with his hands and mouth, traced every curve and hollow, whispered words of love and need against her skin. Natalie gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, and when they finally came together, it was with a rightness that felt like coming home. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Natalie's head resting on Ben's scarred chest, his fingers playing idly with her hair. The sounds of the celebration had faded, leaving only the quiet night and the beating of two hearts in sync. "I never thought I could have this," Ben said quietly. "After the fire, I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone. I thought no one could look at me and see anything but the scars." "The scars are part of your story," Natalie said, pressing a kiss to his chest. "But they are not the whole story. You are so much more than what happened to you, Ben. You are kind and strong and brilliant. You are a leader and a protector. You are the man I love, and I will remind you of that every day for the rest of our lives if necessary." Ben tightened his arms around her. "I am the luckiest man alive." "We are both lucky," Natalie said. "We found each other against all odds. Now we get to build something extraordinary together." They spent their first weeks of marriage establishing a routine that balanced work at the mine with their new life together. Natalie threw herself into learning every aspect of the mining operation, from the geology of ore deposits to the mechanics of the stamping mill. The miners, initially skeptical of having a woman so involved in the business, gradually came to respect her sharp mind and genuine concern for their welfare. She instituted changes that Ben had wanted to implement, but had lacked the authority to enforce. Better safety equipment. A company doctor who visited the mine twice a week. A small school for the miners' children, taught by a young woman Natalie recruited from Denver. Fair wages and reasonable hours. The improvements cost money, but production increased as worker satisfaction and safety improved. And the Silver Bell mine began to earn a reputation as one of the best operations in Colorado. Ben taught Natalie to ride properly. Not the sedate side-saddle trotting she had learned back east, but real riding that let her gallop across the mountain meadows with the wind in her hair. They explored the surrounding wilderness together, finding hidden valleys and crystal streams, making love under the stars with the peaks standing guard above them. At night, in the small house they had built near the mine, Natalie would trace the scars on Ben's face and body, learning their geography, claiming them as part of the man she loved. Ben, in turn, learned every secret of Natalie's body, discovering all the ways to make her gasp and sigh and cry out his name. They fought sometimes, usually about business decisions, because both of them were stubborn and passionate and had strong opinions about the right way to do things. But they always made up, learning that compromise was not weakness but the foundation of a strong partnership. Mrs. Carlyle visited every few months, delighted with the mine's success and the obvious happiness of the newlyweds. She became a friend and mentor to Natalie, teaching her the intricacies of navigating business as a woman in a man's world. She also began bringing her younger sister on the visits, a widow named Catherine, who seemed to find the rough mine manager named James particularly interesting. Ben and Natalie watched that romance develop with amusement and encouragement. Thomas Garrett remained a faithful friend, his telegraph office serving as Natalie's connection to the wider world. She learned that her father's attorney had successfully defended the estate against the remaining creditors, using the income from the Silver Bell mine as evidence of solvency. The right name, so damaged by scandal, was slowly being rehabilitated. The first winter was harsh, with snow that buried the mine up to the roof peaks and temperatures that made working outside almost impossible. But Ben had prepared well, stockpiling supplies and ensuring the workers had warm housing. Natalie learned to appreciate the fierce beauty of the Colorado winter, the way the mountains turned silver and white under the snow, the absolute silence of a storm night when the world seemed to hold its breath. She also discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, a missed cycle followed by morning sickness that made her understanding of her body's changes unmistakable. She told Ben on a Sunday morning in February, when they were snowed in together, the fire crackling in the hearth, the world outside white and pristine. "I am going to have a baby," she said, the words simple but carrying the weight of her joy and fear. Ben stared at her for a long moment, his expression shifting through shock to wonder to a happiness so intense it made her eyes sting with tears. Then he was on his knees in front of her chair, his hands covering her still, flat belly, his scarred face pressed against her stomach. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Natalie asked, threading her fingers through his dark hair. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Ben said, looking up at her with those extraordinary blue eyes bright with tears. "Terrified, overwhelmed, grateful beyond words. But yes, Natalie, I am happy." The pregnancy was not easy. Natalie suffered from sickness that kept her in bed for weeks, and the high altitude made breathing difficult as her body changed. But Ben was attentive and devoted, bringing her whatever she needed, reading to her when she was too tired to keep her eyes open, holding her hair back when the nausea struck. As spring arrived and the snow began to melt, Natalie's condition improved. She resumed her work at the mine, though Ben insisted on limiting her hours and preventing her from going underground. She compromised by focusing on the business side of operations, corresponding with suppliers and customers, managing the accounts with a precision that made Henderson's theft seem even more egregious in hindsight. Their son was born in early September of 1877, arriving in a rush after a labor that was mercifully short but intensely painful. Ben held Natalie's hand through it all, refusing to be sent away despite the midwife's protests that men had no place in a birthing room. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and squalling, Ben cut the cord with shaking hands and then sat beside the bed with tears streaming down his face. "What shall we name him?" Natalie asked, exhausted but elated, holding the tiny bundle against her chest. Ben was quiet for a moment, looking at his son with an expression of such love it made Natalie's heart ache. "I want to name him after your father," he said finally. "Henry, if you are willing. He gave you the courage to come west to fight for what was yours. Without him, we would never have met." Natalie thought about her father, about his failures and his final desperate attempt to leave her something of value. "Henry Benjamin Fuller," she said. "After both our fathers." Their son thrived, growing strong and healthy in the mountain air. Ben was a devoted father, carrying Henry everywhere in a sling Natalie made, singing him to sleep with old songs, teaching him to laugh with ridiculous faces that made the scarred side of his face pull in ways that had once made Ben self-conscious, but now just made Henry giggle with delight. Natalie discovered that motherhood did not diminish her role in the business. If anything, it made her more determined to build something lasting, something she could pass on to her son. She hired a nanny, a practical young woman from town who had grown up in a large family, and resumed her work at the mine with renewed energy. The Silver Bell continued to prosper. They expanded operations, opening a second shaft that accessed an even richer vein of silver ore. They purchased new equipment, including a state-of-the-art stamping mill that increased processing efficiency by 40%. They established a profit-sharing program for the workers, ensuring that the men who risked their lives underground benefited directly from the mine's success. Ben and Natalie became fixtures in Salida, respected for their business acumen and their obvious devotion to each other. The town itself was growing, transforming from a rough mining camp into a proper community with schools and churches and civic organizations. Natalie joined the Ladies' Aid Society, using her influence to establish a library and a hospital. Ben served on the town council, pushing for improvements in infrastructure and safety regulations. They had their second child, a daughter, when Henry was 3 years old. Rachel was born with Natalie's green eyes and Ben's dark hair, and from the moment she entered the world, She ruled it with an imperious will that made both parents laugh with recognition. Rachel would never hide in anyone's shadow. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of challenges met and overcome, of love that deepened with each passing year. There were hard times. A cave-in that killed 2 miners despite all their safety precautions. A recession that drove down silver prices and forced difficult decisions. A winter illness that nearly took Henry and left Natalie and Ben hollow-eyed with fear until he recovered. But there were more good times than bad. Christmases with the house full of laughter and the smell of pine and cinnamon. Summers spent exploring the mountains with their children, teaching them to ride and fish and appreciate the fierce beauty of their home. Quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over the peaks while Ben's arm rested around Natalie's shoulders, and she leaned into his warmth. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ben surprised Natalie with a trip to Denver, leaving the children with Mrs. Carlisle and Catherine, who now lived in Salida full-time with her husband James. They stayed at the finest hotel, attended the opera, and dined in restaurants where the other patrons stared at Ben's scars until Natalie glared them into submission. "Do you ever wish you had married someone less scarred?" Ben asked one night as they lay together in the hotel's luxurious bed. "Someone who would not attract stares and whispers." Natalie propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at her husband with exasperation and love. "Ben Fuller, we have been married for 10 years. We have 2 children. We have built a successful business and a beautiful life together. And you are still asking me this question." "Old habits," Ben said with a small smile. "Then let me answer it one final time," Natalie said. She traced the scars on his face with gentle fingers, the familiar geography of the man she loved. "These marks are part of your story. They are evidence of your bravery, your selflessness, your strength. They are beautiful to me because they are part of you, and I love every single part of you. I would not change a single thing about you, Ben. Not one scar, not one moment, not one choice that brought us to this point. Do you understand?" Ben pulled her down for a kiss that was deep and thorough and left them both breathless. "I understand," he said when they finally broke apart. "And I will try to believe it." "Good," Natalie said, "because I am not having this conversation again. Find a new insecurity to worry about." Ben laughed, the sound rich and unguarded, and rolled her beneath him. "As you wish, Mrs. Fuller." They returned to Salida refreshed and ready to face whatever came next. What came was an offer from a mining conglomerate in San Francisco, a ridiculous sum of money for the Silver Bell mine and all its assets. Ben and Natalie discussed it seriously, weighing the financial security against their love for the work, the land, the community they had helped build. In the end, they declined the offer. The mine was not just a business to them. It was where they had met, where they had fallen in love, where they had built their life together. It was part of their story, as much as Ben's scars or Natalie's courage or the children who carried both their legacies. "Besides," Natalie said when they informed Mrs. Carlisle of their decision, "what would we do with ourselves if we sold? Sit around and grow old gracefully? Perish the thought," Mrs. Carlisle said with a smile. "Though you might consider expanding. I have been hearing interesting things about gold deposits in the San Juan Mountains." So they expanded, carefully and strategically, purchasing shares in promising operations, and applying the principles that had made the Silver Bell successful. They built a small empire, not through ruthlessness but through integrity, fair dealing, and genuine concern for the people who worked for them. Their children grew. Henry proved to have his father's engineering mind, designing improvements to mining equipment that increased safety and efficiency. Rachel inherited her mother's head for business and her father's determination. arguing her way into the management of their operations, despite the scandal of a young woman involving herself in such matters. "She is just like you," Ben said to Natalie one evening, watching their 18-year-old daughter demolish a pompous investor's arguments with cold logic and devastating wit. "She is just like both of us," Natalie corrected. "Stubborn, brilliant, and unwilling to accept the world's limitations." They had more children over the years. Another son named Thomas after their faithful friend who had passed away from influenza, and twin girls who arrived late in Natalie's childbearing years and promptly turned the household upside down. The house they had built near the mine expanded to accommodate the growing family, sprawling across a meadow with views of the mountains in every direction. Ben's scars faded with time, becoming less red, less raised, simply part of the landscape of his face. But they never disappeared entirely, and Natalie never stopped tracing them, never stopped calling them marks of bravery, never stopped loving the man who wore them. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together half the state of Colorado. The original miners from the Silver Bell, now retired on generous pensions, told stories about the Eastern lady who had arrived in fancy dresses and proceeded to revolutionize mining practices. Mrs. Carlyle, now in her 60s but still sharp as a razor, gave a toast about the power of women who refused to accept limitations. The governor sent a telegram congratulating them on their contributions to Colorado's development. But the best moment came late in the evening, when Ben and Natalie slipped away from the party to walk in the meadow behind their house, the same meadow where they had first told each other about their dreams and fears and hopes for the future. "You remember the day we met?" Natalie asked, her hand tucked into Ben's arm, her head resting against his shoulder. "Every detail," Ben said. "You walked into my office like you owned the place, all fire and determination and Eastern propriety. I thought you were the most terrifying person I had ever met. And now I know you are the most terrifying person I have ever met," Ben said, grinning. "But also the bravest, the kindest, the most brilliant, the love of my life, my partner in every sense of the word." Natalie stopped walking and turned to face him, looking up at the face she knew better than her own, scarred and beloved and home. "I love you, Ben Fuller. I have loved you for 25 years, and I will love you for 25 more, and then however many we get after that." "I love you, Natalie Fuller," Ben said, cupping her face in his scarred hands. "You traced my scars and called them brave, and you taught me that being broken does not mean being worthless. You gave me a life I never thought I deserved. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Natalie corrected, and pulled him down for a kiss that was as passionate as their first, as tender as their 1000th, as full of promise as their future. They lived to see their children grown and successful, to hold their grandchildren, to celebrate 50 years of marriage surrounded by 3 generations of family. The Silver Bell mine continued to operate, managed now by Henry and Rachel in partnership, carrying on the legacy of integrity and innovation their parents had established. Ben and Natalie grew old together, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp, their love deepening with each shared sunrise over the mountains. They took walks in the meadow, told stories to their grandchildren, and held hands on the porch while watching the seasons change. Ben passed away on a quiet morning in autumn, in his sleep, with Natalie's hand in his and their children and grandchildren filling the house with life and love. His funeral drew people from across Colorado, all coming to honor a man who had transformed the mining industry, built a town, raised a family, and loved his wife with a devotion that became legendary. Natalie lived for 5 more years, overseeing the business, spoiling her grandchildren, and preserving the story of how a scarred cowboy who kept his face in shadow met an Eastern banker's daughter who refused to see him as anything but brave. She wrote it all down in careful script, creating a record of their love for future generations. She died peacefully surrounded by family, her last words a whispered, "I am coming, Ben. Wait for me." They were buried together in the cemetery overlooking Salida, their graves marked by a simple headstone that read, "Ben and Natalie Fuller, partners in life, love, and courage." Below that, carved in smaller letters, were the words that had defined their relationship from the beginning. She traced the marks and called them brave. The Silver Bell mine operated for another 30 years, finally closing in the 1930s when the silver played out. But the Fuller name lived on in Colorado, carried by descendants who inherited that particular blend of courage, integrity, and stubborn determination that had characterized the founders. And in Salida, in the small historical society museum that Rachel established in her mother's memory, there hung a photograph of Ben and Natalie Fuller taken on their 50th wedding anniversary. Ben stood tall and proud, his scarred face fully visible, his arm around his wife. Natalie leaned into him, her face radiant with love, her hand resting on his chest directly over his heart. They looked at each other in that photograph like they were the only two people in the world, like they had discovered something precious and rare and absolutely unbreakable. Which, of course, they had. Their love story became part of Colorado folklore, told and retold over the years, inspiring young couples and reminding old ones of what was possible when two people chose to see past surface scars to the beauty beneath. It was a story about courage and faith and the transformative power of love. About a woman who refused to accept limitations, and a man who learned that his scars were not shameful but proud evidence of who he truly was. It was a story about the Wild West, about mining and mountains and building something from nothing. But more than anything, it was a story about two people who found each other against all odds and built a life of such richness and meaning that its echoes continued long after they were gone. A story where she traced the marks and called them brave, and he loved her for it until the day he died. A love story for the ages, born in shadow and blazing into light, as fierce and enduring as the mountains themselves.